We have a lot of stuff to cover tonight. And the reason I decided to do so many topics tonight, um, some of which I think I can get through pretty quickly, and some of which are just too important to wait. Um, and if the news cycle is just flying, mostly because we have a lunatic in the White House who just makes crazy decisions every day. And you remember when you used to just sit back and 3 or 4 days would go by and you wouldn't hear from the president? It was so pleasant. You're like, oh, nothing happened today. No big deal. No wars. No major sex scandals. No convictions for fraud. No taking other people's oil. No shutting down international borders and bridges that have just been built by other countries at their dime. Remember those days? Those days are over, aren't they? So we have to just hit some more topics. And Holly will keep track of some of your questions, and we'll go through some stuff and make plenty of time to answer stuff. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the Save America Act. It's an election issue, obviously, right? And we're going to have somebody on to talk about the importance of this proposed legislation that's now passed the House and working its way through the Senate. And there's no other way of putting it. I think let me just be reasonable here. I'll play my moderate side a little bit. I don't think the world has a problem. I don't think Americans have a problem with wanting to make sure that the people voting in our elections are Americans, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way these laws are written. One of the first things that this law would do is go into effect immediately, right? So here we are, February. We have primaries coming up. Oh, there's Dixie's drinking water. We have primaries coming up, and if the law goes in effect immediately, and these states start purging voters off their swing states or Republican-controlled states, start purging people off their rolls because they can't verify they're Americans or not. Then they have a way to swing the elections and sway the elections, and I think that's one of the problems. The other, just go over the law a little bit. Things you need to know about SAVE Act. Let's just do a little bit of that. Touch it in here. I'm gonna have to. It's a little dark, so I'm gonna have to go with a little flashlight action on my phone. Bear with me. There we go. So I'm going over a report from the Campaign Legal Center, who did an analysis of this and looked at, over the course of 4 months, looked at various states throughout the United States to see what the impact would be. And their estimation is that more than 21 million Americans are unable to access additional documentation that would be required to register to vote under these bills. Doesn't mean they would always be, but it means it'd be hard. Like, not everybody, for instance, has a passport, right? I have 2 passports, I have American and Canadian passport. There was one point where I had 3 passports, where I had 2 American passports to travel on because I was traveling for work so much. Journalists were permitted, almost like a diplomat, to have 2 passports. This is not a problem for me. I could take any passport in and say, pick a card, any card. But not everybody does that because not everybody travels. So getting passports are not cheap anymore, right? It's not like $10, minimum. It's like 80 or $100 or $200 or something like that. I can't remember. And if you have to have it expedited, like these people would have to, it could be several $100s. I've had to do that many times in the past too. So, birth certificates. They say, well, a birth certificate would suffice. Well, yeah, but again, a birth certificate doesn't have your picture to identify you. So you're gonna have to go through some other form of finding a way to identify you so they can match your birth certificate with the picture. So real IDs could be utilized, right? And those things that allow you to fly on planes with your driver's license, but they're real IDs. But not everybody has one of those because, again, they don't fly. They don't necessarily need one. So you're dealing with basically a Republican Party that wants it. They know the people who would utilize these advantages of being able to just walk in and say, yes, I'm an American, are mostly middle class or affluent people who travel more, who have more resources. Maybe they're not, maybe the Republicans aren't as many black people in the Republican Party, socially disadvantaged people of color, Hispanic people who have not used the system a lot, people who aren't really sophisticated with the internet. They haven't been down to their, Department of Vital Statistics in their own state and don't know how to find this information. Or maybe they just don't have the money. And it could so easily be one of those kind of things where somebody would say, well, I haven't done it yet. I'm going to get around to it. They don't get around to it. And because of that, they don't vote. And that's enough to tip the elections in their favor. And the Republicans understand this. And they're gonna figure out every way they can to tip things in their favor, just like they've done with the gerrymandering issues that they've tried to do with gerrymandering. Um, also women who are married and had changed their legal names, the paperwork to run that around. If you've ever been a female and either been married or been divorced, the paperwork trail could be very difficult, getting, bank accounts changed, getting, new social security cards, all this kind of stuff that comes with it is time consuming. And if your only incentive is so you can vote, many people are just going to pass. And as a result of that, the people who really deserve to be voting in this country won't get a chance to. So that's partly part and parcel why so many people are against this legislation. Again, if the federal government said, we're trying to figure out a way over the next 4 years to get as many Americans registered to vote so we know they're Americans, I think a lot of people would be okay with that. We're going to spend 4 years doing it. The legislation calls for a 4-year plan. And the government's going to set up centers around, like your polling places, where you can go in and show your documentation, and then we'll issue you voter cards. I mean, I think a lot of people might think that's reasonable. Some people don't think that's reasonable. Whatever. It's to each your own. But the fact is that there's nothing reasonable about the way they're trying to slam this through. The timing of this is really interesting, not just because primaries are coming up or because they're getting ready to get their ass kicked over in the House with the election coming up in November, and they know it. They know it. The polling tells them everything. They're trying to figure out ways to get around that. And what happened this last couple of weeks? We've seen they've had some major losses when it came to gerrymandering issues in the courts. So, they challenged California, and California is going to be able to do what they want with their districts. And you see an effort here in Virginia, for instance, where I live, where the Democrats were trying to change, 10 of the 11 districts to blue through gerrymandering. Why? Because Trump said he was going to do the thing in Texas. If you start a fight, you can't be mad when people try to finish the fight. They started it. The Republican Party started it. And Democrats said, don't do this. If you do this in Texas, we're going to retaliate. And that's what you're seeing. Indiana, the Republican-led legislature in Indiana had the incredible foresight and good sense to understand how it could affect them down the line. They said, no, it's not the right thing. We're not going to do it. But a lot of other Republican states are trying to do it. So Democrats moved in turn to counter those measures. And because it's backfiring on them now, and California has tons of seats, just like Texas, they realize this might not turn out in our favor. Everybody can do the math on these seats, these congressional seats, and they're figuring out it's not going to work in their favor. So what does Mike Johnson do? Mike goes, well, let's revive this voting act. What's it called? My brain just went blank on me. The SAVE, yeah, sorry. They've had 3 or 4 different names for this over the past 5 years. The Save America Act. Actually, it was just called the SAVE Act originally. And Mike Johnson had it as the SAVE Act. And Trump didn't think that sounded patriotic enough and urgent enough, so that he had him add America to it, right? Thank you, KM, for trying to help me through my brain fuzz. So they decided to call the SAVE Act the Save America Act. Anytime you guys know this, right? But anytime you see the word patriot in front of something or America in front of something, you can pretty much guarantee that it's being offered up by fascists. People who are patriotic don't have to scream it. They don't have to wear jackets that are red, white, and blue flags all over them while they're telling people they shouldn't desecrate the flag. Right? That's funny. The hypocrisy of it. Don't desecrate the flag. You can't burn my flag. Hey, look at my blazer. So they do that kind of stuff. And when they say something's patriotic, it's generally not patriotic. And when they say something is American, it's probably not that American. Because the ultimate result of this is to try to get for them to have power. Now, let's take their argument at face value, okay, for the fun of it, which is so many undocumented people are voting, it's swaying the elections, and that's why Republicans can't win. There's a lot of studies out on that. You have the Cato Institute stuff that came out recently in 2024, shedding light. You guys can look this stuff up. It's all over the place. I did a few hours worth of work today just to kind of get on top of it. There were some Republicans saying between 10 and 27% of the undocumented people in this country have registered to vote, which is nonsense. All the conventional thinking and all the research studies These are people who literally spent months and months studying each state and trying to put their hands on what that number really was. They've dialed it down to between 0 and 1%. And the only reason they don't say it's 0% is because that's not a mathematical, it'd be mathematically sort of impossible, but it's such a small number that it's somewhere between 0 and 1%. And that you can go state by state. I've got literally pages and pages and pages of documents from different states showing the amount of cases they've found in different states across the country. And sometimes you'll see like 200 cases of undocumented people that registered and like 120 of them voted. And it turns out to be like something like 0.29, like 1/1000th of a percent. It's so ridiculous, the numbers. And this is pretty much, this is nationwide. Even in Republican states where they want this to be an issue, the numbers don't match up. They don't add up to more than 1%. And that's why this is so dangerous, because not only is it just to stop undocumented immigrants from registering and voting illegally, but what it really does is disenfranchises the people that we do want voting, Americans. We want Americans voting in American elections. And to try to, some parts of this legislation are like, you know, every month you could have states would have a cleansing of their. Okay, the Trump administration wants to have their hands. You hear in Minnesota that Pam Bondi's like, if you just give us your voter rolls, we might take our people away, our ICE people. Why? Why does she ask that? Because across the United States, wherever there's voter information, there's a lot of information that comes with that. Your personal data, your life, your address, your everything, which gives them power. But it also tells you things like which party you're registered to vote with. So how easy would it be if everybody had that in a national database, and the government could just go, hey, this guy's a Republican. His last name's Gonzalez. Oh, this guy's last name is Gonzalez, but he's a Democrat. So we want to get rid of that Democrat. So you can go through there and you can see how selectively they could figure out ways to try to take your vote away. And so that's why it's so important that states protect your voter information. And I think in Arizona, I saw a clip today from one of the officials in Arizona saying, it's against the law. It's a felony in his state to give this information away. So over his dead body, will he give it to the federal government? I mean, this is a largely Republican state. People's information and private information should remain private, right? I think we all sort of agree with that. Yes, Kim, this is a great stat you're throwing. I did see the Brennan Center study from 2016. Some of the stuff I'm looking at now is more recent, but I saw that one. It's 30 suspected cases out of 23.5 million votes. 0.0001. And that's the Brennan Center in 2024, right? So you're seeing the same stuff that that we're seeing in terms of the statistics. Let me just see if there's anything in here I highlighted that I want to make point. Oh, the other thing. This is really interesting. Do you think undocumented immigrants, what would they do if they were caught voting in an election? Do you think undocumented immigrants want to get sent back to their native country? Like, why would they risk that? There's no payoff for them to risk that. It's the stupidest thing in the world to think that an undocumented immigrant is going to risk it and go try to vote. So that and it's pretty easy to walk back where you're from and your information on your license or whatever piece of information you put forward. You're much easier to find when you made a record of your vote than if you're not voting. And so it's ridiculous to think they would put themselves at risk like that to be deported and charged with a felony, right? Because that's an automatic deportation. When you're charged with a crime, they throw you right out of the country. But if you're charged with a crime and it's illegally voting in our elections, they're definitely going to throw you out of the country. Why would they risk that? Sometimes people just don't ask these very simple questions. Like in Congress, why aren't they sitting down and saying, hey, Mike Johnson, will you explain to me why an undocumented immigrant would risk getting thrown out of the country and not getting their immigration status at some point down the road just to vote in one election? Is that something you think is normal? Do you have evidence of that? Mike Johnson was spouting off the other day about how in some of these Democratic states, we're really concerned this is happening. He said that without proof at all, no proof. And that's what we have to look for. When they say shit like this, What is your evidence? Journalists and investigators, we're all the same. What evidence do you fucking have to make these statements? You know, again, when he's in a press gaggle and you get one or two questions off, you're not going to get to press him on that issue. That's why I hate press conferences, because these guys are geniuses at knowing how to deal with the media when there's 20 of them in front of them. You're like, this is a problem. Next, Jim. And they go to the next person and you're screwed. And you just look like a putz because you can't ask a follow up. And he's not going to answer the follow up anyways. You saw Pam Bondi yesterday. I mean, a simple question to Pam Bondi would be, when do you plan on, according to the law, as you're prescribed, you have to do, releasing the names of all these pedophiles or people alleged to be pedophiles? When are you going to release that as the law requires? Nobody really got to the essence of that question. And it should have been every single Democrat on that committee in the Judiciary Committee should have asked that question at least once and pressed her on it. And every time she came up with, like with Jamie Raskin, you're not even a lawyer. Oh, you're not even a lawyer. Jamie Raskin got his law degree at Harvard. He was editor of the Law Review. He then was a prosecutor for a couple of years in Massachusetts. Then after that, what did he do? He went for 25 years and taught constitutional law at among places like American University in Washington, D.C. And she says he's not a lawyer. She went to Stetson University. It sounds more like a Texas hat than it does a university where you get a law degree. There's like 300, I think there's something in the neighborhood of 300 ranked law schools, and Stetson is right up there with the, lesser 1%. And then there's Harvard at the other end of the scale, which is like way up there, and there's Stetson way down here. She had the nerve to ask him that. But that's what she's doing. She's distracting from the question, which is, tell me why you have not released these names and why you're, it's one thing to be releasing the names of the victims, but it's quite another to not be releasing what the law requires. You can make an argument that she's making mistakes and her people are sloppy and all that stuff. I don't believe any of that, but let's just say that's the case. Well, you certainly are redacting the names of the perpetrators on purpose. That's not a mistake. Read the law. So, I think this voter stuff is, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. There's a good story, July 30th in NPR. It explains a lot of the claims and it goes through a lot of sightings. I'll just refer you to it. It's titled, "Despite Grand Claims, New Report Shows Non-Citizen Voting Hasn't Materialized." I would just go read that. It's just a good 3-page refresher on why it's all horseshit, And I want to let you guys know, I'm not doing a lot of these deep dives today on this. I'm relying on a lot of reporting from who I consider reputable news organizations. And then I'm taking that and I'm condensing that information and giving you my thoughts and analysis and commentary on that. Okay. So I always try to give credit where credit's due. These reporters that do these painstaking, studies and reports, and they do really great work, and you should give them credit when they're doing that work. So that's sort of the Save America stuff. And I'd like to just get some questions from that before we go on the next topic. Poll tax if we need. That's a good point. Is it a poll tax if you need to buy credentials to vote? I mean, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a lawyer. But yes, there's an argument to be made that if you have to pay for something, then that disenfranchises you based on how much money you have, right? And we're trying to get away with not doing that anymore. But what I would say is if you set up a system whereby the U.S. government took some tax money, maybe bought a couple less F-35s, I'm just saying, and then they put that money towards, that would be an F-35s of what, $200, $300 million aircraft, let's say 600 million, see how many people we could get registered and give them little cards. It's all about priorities. Just to kind of not get too off topic, I'm both Canadian and American, as you guys hear all the time. And people always say, well, you're a socialist, communist, whatever Canadian. And I always explain to them, and this is a great argument to make to those people who give you that bullshit argument about whether you're a socialist or a communist, whether you're American or Canadian or whatever. First of all, the Canadian government makes decisions based on what its people want. They elect these people to parliament and they elect a prime minister. And they choose a prime minister based on the party who wins. And then when that happens, they know very clearly what the government is to do because the voters had told them, because the priorities of each party are very spelled out carefully in their platforms. So what's happening is not socialism and communism. It's actually democracy. And what the Canadian government does better than the American government, in my opinion, is they have their priorities straight. So you have a certain amount of money and you can decide whether you want to spend it on tanks or whether you want to spend it on people's healthcare. That's not communism. That's democracy at work. People are actually telling you, hey, this is a good thing. We get to make decisions about how this money is spent. Wouldn't it be great if Americans could actually go, hey, I'd love to figure out what money is spent, what our money's spent towards. Maybe we don't want to be taking out Maduro with billions of dollars of military resources in Venezuela, but maybe we want to continue to have, a move towards healthcare that is paid for, and we remove the middleman like insurance companies so they don't steal away our entire nest egg. So, that's the argument you make. It's like, no, it's not communism or socialism when you are in a democratic society and you're making decisions based on priorities, spending priorities. And that's what, other countries in Europe do the same thing. You have free childcare in places like Germany, you have free education all over Europe for things like university and college, or reduce costs at least. That's not communism. That is spending priorities. We just happen to spend all of our money on defense. And I say that as a guy who covered defense for 30 years. I mean, we spend a lot. We spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. So what do you think's happening there? Probably some defense contractors get paid an awful lot to do probably more than they, you know what I mean? Like there's contracts there that are way over budget, way overpriced, and they continue and they roll and they just keep gathering momentum, and we have to keep spending it. And once you're locked into something, a missile system or something you spent years and years developing it, it's too late to pull the plug on it. So you end up spending more and more money. And, lots of countries don't waste their money that way. So, all right, let's go to the next question.
Someone wants to know what the two Canadian parties are, like the CNSU, Conservatives and Liberals.
Yeah, it's roughly you have a two-party structure up there. You also have other smaller parties, but you have the Liberal Party and you have the Conservative Party up there, and they do argue about the same sorts of things that we argue here in the United States, and they're vociferous about it. And you also have, the Parti Québécois, which French Canadian party, and so they always are very protective of French rights in the province of Quebec. I grew up in French Canada when I was a young kid, and they were always trying to separate from the country, and it was always weird. And we had English and French schools, and then my family ended up moving back to Ontario because of this dude named René Lévesque, who was pushing hard for French Canadian rights, and really drove a wedge between the English Canada but it's not just it's not. I mean, this has been going back since the British fought the French over Canada in the first place, and it's kind of one of those things like a little miniature civil war like the Americans had, with a lot less violence, that took a lot less time. Anyways, next.
Paul Meehan called you fence sitter. If you'd like to address Paul.
Yeah, my friend Paul. I don't know it. Yeah. Paul Meehan said, I'm my friend Paul Meehan, who has helped us put our cabins up and lives 3 miles away. Calls me a fence sitter. I don't know what that means.
American Canadian.
Oh, American, because I'm American and Canadian. Well, I mean, I don't know what to tell you, Paul. Quit trying to hijack my podcast, Paul. You have plenty of time with me. Just go back to putting tiles in one of your bathrooms.
RideHighland.org.
Yeah, RideHighland.org. He's got a great. He's got Ride Highland, this thing for. Anyways, it's a nonprofit for people who like to cycle through the county. Let's see. I can't read that.
Isn't the time and money spent on elections limited in Canada?
I'm not up to date with Canadian election law anymore because I don't live there anymore. But I know that they don't spend tens of billions of dollars on elections like they do here. Part of that's population. You got 40 million, roughly 40 million Canadians, and 360 million Americans, something like that. And there's more money to be had, but we also don't. We don't have the same influence with lobbyists in Canada as we do here in the United States, which I think is a big danger. So yeah, you guys could chime in on, my Canadian brethren could chime in on that as much as you want. Let's see.
How are people currently verified as American citizens?
Well, you go through it when you get your when you go to the voting rolls. You have to show them initially that you were a U.S. citizen. You can't just walk up and say, "My name's Jeff," and be put on the rolls. I went here in Virginia. I had to register. I had to show my real ID. So I showed my real ID, and they then put me on the rolls. And my real ID is verified through things like my passport. That's how you get a real ID. So a lot of those things happen And by the way, if you vote illegally and are caught, it's a felony. So I think the Republicans are discounting that a lot. If you get convicted of voting illegally, you can go to jail. And that's a price that a lot of people don't want to pay. I think that what the Republicans are really trying to do is they're trying to get people on their side to believe this argument that this is a massive problem when it's not, when it's really about trying to get people not to vote who you think will not vote for you. They're playing a shell game, and they're suggesting it's one thing when deep down in their hearts, they know what it's really about is trying to keep poor people from voting, because poor people have a tendency to vote Democrat more than they do Republican. It's just simple math. So, yeah. What else?
There's a lot of people wondering, what happens if the birth certificate doesn't match. I was adopted, and then I married, and then I was divorced and remarried, and now I'm widowed.
Yeah. So the question is what if you have certain documents don't match other documents because you're remarried and divorced and all stuff? And this is a big part of the debate going on right now with the Save America. I hate saying that. Save America. Saving America from what? Saving America from Republicans. The Save America Act. And I think that that's a big part of the debate right now. It's going to happen in the Senate. It's going to happen as you try to figure out whether this is going to pass or not. And the problem is that the Democrats do not have control of the House or Senate. Okay. It's just simple mathematics. And then once it passes that, it's going to go on to the president's desk, and it's going to be signed by him because this is what he wants. So it's going to be a lot, and there'll be lawsuits about it and all this kind of stuff. And there's more lawsuits going on about elections right now than in my entire lifetime of 58 years. Why is that? And it largely has to do with the fact, in my opinion, that Republicans know they don't have the numbers to win. And they're trying to utilize a small minority of people to utilize their power over a larger minority of people. And that's fascism, really. When small groups try to manage large groups and they force things upon them that the elections wouldn't allow, that's fascism. That's totalitarianism. And that's what they're trying to do. Everything they do is about a smaller group trying to force a larger group into doing something. And so, yeah, that's sort of my short answer for that. What else? We're going to take one more question on this topic, and we're going to move on to something else.
Yeah. It's not a question, but Laura Marie said, if they want to catch undocumented workers, they should do the opposite, get them to vote and have a reason to arrest them. Joking, of course.
Yeah. Okay. I'll leave that one. Leave that one instead. But
that's it.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to move on. And I'd like to move on to something else. I'd like to move on to Ukraine. And the reason I say this is because we've been so lost in our politics here. They always say all politics is local, which is true. And the reason I think the needle's being moved recently in the United States is because, when Ukraine was not getting its funding and everybody was sticking up for, and the Republican Party was sticking up for Vladimir Putin, people are like, it's terrible. You shouldn't do that. Our forefathers, my grandfather fought against the Russian, like that whole thing. And we went to kill Nazis, and now they're supporting Nazis, right? But it really didn't move the needle. It was when we started seeing things happen like places like Minneapolis, where Americans were getting their butts kicked by these thugs, and where we saw everyday people who were kind, who worked in our neighborhood restaurants and pubs and were doing our laundry and all the kind of stuff that immigrants do when they first move here. And we saw them being mistreated, that we really started seeing things change. And then the other side of that is economics. When, the most important thing in politics is that when people don't believe that they're economically viable, when groceries go up and your utility bills are going up or skyrocketing, and they're going to keep going up, especially as AI continues to use more and more of that power that we're using. I'm stealing this idea from Mr. Global, but I've been watching a lot of his stuff lately in the last year about this power surge that he's talking about will continue to happen. I think if you're not watching, if you are interested in your energy bills going up, go find Mr. Global and watch him. He's an oil expert who's very intelligent, and he speaks a lot like I do. He's very irreverent. He's like, just watch him. He's fantastic. I mean, same thing for like people like Joyce Vance when it comes to, the law. I have 4 or 5 people that I really love to listen to that are in that realm. But yeah, I mean, when people feel disenfranchised, their utilities are going up, their groceries are going up, skyrocketing, their rents are going up, which is continuing to happen. The prices of cars go up because you're charging for parts that are made in China to build them over here, and tariffs and all those kinds of things. And then what they do is they scream, well, look at like Pam Bondi yesterday. Look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, over 50,000 for the first time in history. Well, yeah, the Dow Jones has a tendency to go like this most of the time. goes most of the time like this, sometimes does that, but then goes back up again and recovers. That's what happens with Dow. And a lot of people have money in their 401ks that are affected by the Dow, right? But the majority of people who make real money in the stock market are affluent and wealthy people. They live a different life than we do. I think it's fair to say that, people who are killing it in the Dow are not necessarily the people who are struggling to buy their 5 bags of groceries. And so we used to look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average and look at the market gains and think that America is doing great just because you see that number going up. But more and more, we're starting to understand that those two things aren't necessarily connected. A company doing well, like say Amazon, doesn't mean we get cheaper groceries or things to buy from Amazon. They might be making more money because they moved the prices up on something, but we might be getting hurt because the prices have gone up on something. And so those two things don't necessarily correlate. I'm not an economist, but this is a lot of people believe this, that we don't tie those two things together as necessarily as we used to. So Ukraine, I read something this morning. It just made me say, we can't forget about Ukraine. Okay. There was a woman in Ukraine who's a journalist there, and I've reached out to her. And at some point, if I can get her to agree, I'm not going to say her name today, but if I can get her to agree, I'm going to get her on a podcast to talk about life in Ukraine right now. And she wrote a note on her Substack and it said, endured this winter, and it was astonishing. This is what we did. We led stray animals onto public transport so they could keep warm. We built ice houses for our children. We danced on the frozen Kyiv Sea. We created winter shelters for swans. We wrapped rescuers' legs to keep them warm as they help people in sub-zero temperatures after the shellings. We watched children rejoice in winter despite everything. We thanked electricians who came to Kyiv from all over the country to restore power after the attacks. By the way, I think 60% of the power in Ukraine has been destroyed by Russian missiles and Russian attacks. So they're running on 60% power. Imagine that. It's like last week, it was like some of the temperatures reached down to negative 20 Fahrenheit. We laughed at improvised costume shows. We admired figure skaters on the same frozen Kyiv Sea. It was a month of trials and we made it through it. So it just reminded me there are people still living there. It's not just a geopolitical dick swinging contest between, Volodymyr Zelensky, who I believe is a genuinely awesome dude, and Vladimir Putin, And so we just need to remember that. And going from that, we're going to combine a little bit of Olympics here. And you probably saw today, this guy right here, if you've seen on the news, he's a luge guy. They call it skeleton. Ukrainian skeleton racer, Vladislav Hershevich. I didn't get the name right, but you get the Mr. Hershevich. They asked him a couple days ago because they saw on his helmet, and you can see his helmet here. You see those people? Those people on his helmet were prospective and former Ukrainian Olympians. And to memorialize them, they were killed in this war by Russians. And to memorialize them, he put them on his helmet. And when they saw that on his helmet, the International Olympic Committee went to him and said, you can talk about it in the press conferences, but it's against. And then they did it anyways because they're prideful people and they don't want to be silenced when Vladimir Putin is killing everybody in their country. The sport is not as important as the message. That's what he's saying. He trained for 4 years to have this moment, and he threw it away over principle. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had more people like that in our country who are willing to sacrifice something for principle? And the IOC president, her name's Christy Coventry, okay? Christy Coventry. I just did a little deep dive on Christy Coventry today. A little shallow dive. Christy Coventry, you heard her. She had a comment about it. She said it was a very difficult decision because she talked to him as an athlete when they decided they were going to disqualify him from the Olympics because of this, what they called a political message. And IOC is against politics. Now, remember, in these press conferences, Donald Trump's saying all this shit and JD Vance saying all this shit about the Americans who are just being asked about the Americans' position, what their position is on the American government right now. And some of them are talking about it a little bit. They're being restrained, but it's still politics. Obviously, they're not getting disqualified, nor should they be. But this guy's getting disqualified. And that's all the while Israel is participating in the Winter Olympics, you know, and Russia, it's not participating under the flag, but they have athletes there. They're participating as independents. So they're allowed to participate. And this guy putting his dead friends on his helmet is a political message under the IOC's rules. And old Christy Coventry had to give him the bad news. She's a 41-year-old former Zimbabwean swimmer and a gold medalist. So she's got her medal. She's got her medals, right? She's had her Olympics. She's from Zimbabwe. Now, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about Russian invasion of a sovereign country and killing its people. Okay? She's from Zimbabwe. Driven by colonial expansion led by Cecil Rhodes and the British South African Company. White settlement of Zimbabwe began in the 1890s. They went there for mineral and economic motivation, these white settlers. I wonder where she's from. She's from Zimbabwe, so she's African, right? This white gold medalist swimmer. I wonder where her heritage is from. I don't know, but it's probably not African. Land grants and agriculture. When deposits proved less profitable than expected, they encouraged permanent settlements, granting 1,200 hectares, around 3,000 acres per plot, to white settlers. So, are we really fucking expecting her to understand this guy's mission? She's from a country that was colonized black people. They went in, they took over their country, and they colonized it in Africa with white people. So, of course, she doesn't understand when Vladimir Putin crosses the border and tries to take over Ukraine. And she calls it a political message. It's not political to her, just business. Just business. And, of course, you don't want to ruin the Olympics with something like politics. Horrendous. Remember the 68 Olympics in Mexico, I think it was, Mexico City? And those guys standing on the podium with their arms raised, the black runners. And they try to kick them off the Olympic team too. Take their medals and everything, right? Remember that? Mr. Smith, he was my track coach at Santa Monica College. Didn't even know it. He never said a word about it. He was my track coach. And when I went to Bosnia to cover the Bosnian War, right after I left Santa Monica College, where I took his track class, he said, "Send me a postcard. I really want to hear from my students, the great things they're doing." And I sent him a postcard and he wrote me back. I mean, this is, when you think about that moment of him standing on that podium, go look that picture up, 68 Olympics. And he's standing there raising his hand because of the injustices. He represented his country, but there were social injustices going on with African Americans. When the IOC and those guys made that decision to punish these black athletes, in the time, everybody thought it was a great idea. But now, looking back on history, we know it was wrong. And he's had his, reputation restored because he took a stance on something that was more important than the sport itself. And I think that's what that athlete took, that stance, that luge driver from Ukraine has done, taking that stance. And I think it was a very proud moment in his history. And I think he's going to go down as the bigger person. And I think what the fuck her name is? Christy Coventry. I think she's going to go down as somebody who didn't get it, didn't understand it, and didn't fight for the right stuff. Especially given the athletes that are allowed to be competing at those games right now. You think about Gaza and the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the genocide that they committed there. Sorry if that offends anybody, but it's the truth. I've covered war my entire life, and I know genocide when I see it. So, and that's nothing about the Jewish people. There's a lot of good Jewish people out there, but Netanyahu, I mean, he's a war criminal. He's going to be tried as a war criminal someday. So think about I just want you to think about this war in Ukraine. The Russians are losing 35,000 men a month. A month. I'm going to give you some numbers here in a second. Battlefield casualties, U.S. battlefield casualties and fatality numbers. The United States suffered 54,000 battle deaths in the Korean War, the entire Korean War. 47,434 deaths during the Vietnam War. I actually think that number's higher. I heard the number 54,000 was for the Vietnam War. I might be transposed, but it's what I'm reading. 149 deaths during the 1991 Gulf War. 2,465 deaths in the Afghan Operation Enduring Freedom, and then 4,432 deaths in Iraq. The entire sets of those wars, and they're losing 35,000 men a month. They've lost nearly 1.8 million men in the 4 years since this war started between both sides, the Ukrainian and the Russian side. It's an amazing loss of life that most people cannot comprehend. Think about how in our psyche, the Vietnam War with 50-something thousand people killed in that war, how that was just like a massive number, massive, right? And then you think 35,000 a month Russians. And now Putin is not even just killing his own people. He's taking people out of Africa and throwing them on the front lines, and people from North Korea and throwing them on the front lines. So the reason I'm talking about this tonight is because I want us not to forget about Ukraine, because Ukraine is one of those countries that is on the edge of Europe and stands to help Europe protect itself from Putin and his aggression. And I think we can't forget about that story. It's really important. Yeah. Any questions about Ukraine at all? Bueller? I hope people are still with me. I haven't seen this thing move in a while.
I think they're there. They just don't have questions right now.
Okay. Let's see. Very quiet over there. I don't see anybody in the live chat asking anything, so I'm going to move on. We'll start with a little Epstein stuff here. If you guys are still here, somebody give me a thumbs up, because I haven't seen this thing move in like 5 minutes with questions.
I've seen that move.
Oh, you are?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. My Holly's seen everything move, and my stuff isn't moving at all. So here's a little thing I thought was interesting. This is from February 9th. This is Monday this week, right? GOP Senator changes her tune on the Epstein files release. She says, "Now I see what a big deal it is." We've moved to the comedy portion of the evening. Senator Cynthia Loomis, a Republican from Wyoming, told congressional reporter Pablo Manriquez on Monday that she now supports the full release of the Epstein files after expressing her shock at the inclusion of a 9-year-old victim in the files. She saw that. I guess when they were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, it didn't resonate with her. But when she saw the 9-year-old standing there holding her, parts and with the skinny little knees, and it was in the Epstein files, she suddenly now thought it was important. And she said, "Wow, this is a direct quote. I can't make this shit up. Wow. Well, initially my reaction to all this was, I don't care. I don't know what the big deal is." Fuck. But now I see what a big deal it is, and it was worth investigating. And members of Congress that have been pushing this were not wrong. I'm glad she knows that now. I mean, this is like 2 days in a row that people seem to be understanding things in the Republican Party, right? Now it's a big deal. So that's really my only reaction, she said. That's how you start off a good conversation about the Epstein files, right? Holy shit. And by the way, guess what? This won't surprise you. She says this now. Here's a line that I left out. My fault. I should have included this line. Loomis announced late last year she will not be running for re-election. Ain't that the shit? Her term ends January 2027. So now she has courage because she's not running for re-election. All those cowards over there, man. And they're on both parties, by the way. They never say anything that they think until they know they're not running again. Terrible. Jamie Raskin. This is a stat that I think should be really telling. Senator Raskin. Do you remember the other day when Pam Bondi said Senator Raskin wasn't a lawyer? Well, basically trying to tell him to shut up because he was asking questions that bothered her. This is Senator Raskin. Just a reminder to you, in case you're joining late. She said he wasn't a lawyer. He got his law degree from Harvard. He was summa cum laude. He was editor of the Harvard Law Review. He went on to practice as a prosecutor for 2 years in Massachusetts. Then he went on to teach 25 fucking years of constitutional law at American University in Washington, where she now resides. Talk about somebody who's clueless. DOJ is giving members of Congress just 4 computers in the satellite office to read the unredacted Epstein files of more than 3 million documents. Now that's the 3 million that have been released. They gave him 4 computers, working 40 hours a week on nothing but this. Jamie Raskin said it would take more than 7 years for the 217 members who signed the House discharge petition to read the documents they've decided to release. And there's still 3 million more being held. So you're looking at a 14-year process if everybody who signed the discharge petition that became law would read them or want to read them. It just gives you a sense of how fucked it is. I mean, every obstacle they can put in place to delay and obstruct, she will put in place. Everything. And that's what she's done. And Raskin is right to call her out on it. Here's another little tidbit. This comes from CBS News, my not favorite network anymore. But high-profile House Democrat, again, this is Jamie Raskin and another couple Democrats on the committee, we're saying Pam Bondi was spying on their search history. And they saw it on the back of her notes when she was in this congressional judiciary hearing. And there's photos of it. She literally had the name of the person who'd done the search in Congress and the file number and what it said. They were literally reading basically over the shoulders electronically over what these people were looking at. You know, they say they don't have the resources to do anything. They say they don't have time to redact things quickly. They say all this shit. And in the same breath, they say, you know, Donald Trump gave us all the resources to cut crime. How does that square? Like, how do you say you have the resources, but you don't have the resources? And when you do have the resources, you don't actually chase the predators. You look at the members of Congress to see what they're reading, to see if they're getting anything on you. Disgusting. Here's just a picture of that. If you want to go look it up, that's literally the names of the Congress people and the files they pulled up on the back of her hands in the congressional hearing she's in. She's got to do a better job of hiding it. Thing on his desk upside down. I wouldn't read it because I could read upside down and backwards. Anyways, you know, she apparently doesn't understand that. Yeah, just a disgusting thing to do, spying on your own U.S. Congress. Now, when we're talking about the Epstein files, I think there's something really important. A lot of people have been in the comments and mentioning the statute of limitations. And I just did a little bit of work on that. I'm not a lawyer, but I just did some research into it today. And every state, for instance, has its own statute of limitations for things like rape and child sexual abuse. Okay. Some of those states are rolling back old laws to make it more easy, to make it easier for people to prosecute. But what I didn't know, because maybe I haven't been paying attention enough, in 2022, wonder who was in office then, federal law eliminated the statute of limitations for victims of child sex abuse and trafficking to file federal civil claims. So the federal criminal prosecution, U.S. federal law provides, quote, extraterritorial jurisdiction for sex offenses for children. Under US 18 USC 2423, U.S. citizens can be prosecuted for sexually abusing minors around or in other territories, like on an island, for instance. So some of the statute of limitations might come into play, but not on civil cases, not now, because somebody who was president in 2022 helped push that through. So I'll give credit where credit's due. 2022 was, who was that? Joe Biden? So I got a bit of criticism as it relates to him sometimes, but in this case, I think his administration did well. I mean, Merrick Garland gets a lot of heat, you know, we can have a conversation about Merrick Garland. You know, he was a guy who would have been a great justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Probably wasn't the perfect guy to be AG, but I tell you one thing about him: he wasn't unlawful, and he wasn't breaking the law, and he followed the law, and he wasn't calling in every day to Joe Biden asking him what his business he should be pursuing legally that day, every day. And he didn't act as the personal lawyer for the Biden administration. He acted like a man who was protecting the rule of law. And he wasn't forcing and pushing things through, and that's what people are frustrated with. But the law moves very slow. It always has, and it always will, unless, of course, you're violating it, which is what you're seeing now. So, yeah. So I just wanted to raise some of those points and talk about some of those things. Now, I want to take some questions. How long will we be on here? What time is it now?
It is 8:53.
So we've been on here, 52 minutes or something like that. And I've been yammering on, and you guys are probably bored out of your minds. But I'd love to take some questions. And if I can't answer it right now because I'm not prepared, I won't. Oh, the other thing I'll say is, yeah, I did. Did we talk about the Mark Kelly thing at all today?
You put up the video on.
I just want you to go back and see the video I put up on Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly 2 days ago, Senator Kelly from Arizona, Democratic senator from Arizona. They try to convene a grand jury against him to charge him with crimes because he was a part of that 90-second video these Congress people did telling soldiers and service members that they didn't have to follow unlawful orders. In other words, don't violate the law. So they try to charge him with that. They want to reduce him in rank. They want to get rid of his military pension and pay. And Kelly fought them on it. And so they tried to take him to a grand jury and have him indicted. And guess what? Remember the saying you always hear? If you're any good at your job, you can indict a ham sandwich. Well, they couldn't indict the ham sandwich. They lose a lot of indictment ham sandwich cases. James Comey, Letitia James, on and on and on. And this one again with Mark Kelly, Senator Kelly. They couldn't indict him. And then today they lost another one because he sued them in federal court, and because he has a right to free speech. And a federal judge appointed by George W. Bush said, and he wasn't an advocate judge, like a Democratic advocate judge appointed by Obama. He was a Republican appointed judge, and he ruled today that Hegseth was out of his mind and had no right to do what he was doing. And he threw the whole thing. He basically said, you can't do this. So they're going to appeal. Hegseth's going to appeal because, like a good Trump appointee, he was going to take it all the way to the end until he, loses, all the way. The Supreme Court will never rule against this. I don't care what the 6-3 majority is. It's a stupid thing to say that you can charge a guy with a crime for telling people to follow the law. It's stupid. And I said this about 3 weeks or a month ago when they originally said they were going to charge him with this stuff and try to take his pay and his rank. Again, he was a Navy pilot, flew combat missions, and then became an astronaut. So here's a guy that's got high credibility, high professionalism. Now he's a U.S. senator, and they're trying to shaft him. And the thing is it's not going to happen. They're just jealous, and they want to shut him up, and it's not going to work. And he's won 2 battles in the course of 3 days. So that's a little bit of breaking stuff. And I did a reel on Facebook about that. So we're going to take a few questions.
Do you mind circling back to Ukraine?
Yeah.
Someone asked, or soon after you finish that, how are journalists, I'm sorry, I may misspeak the exact words, how are journalists managing and handling Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine now has become largely, the question is how are journalists managing and handling Ukraine? And I have friends that are still working in Ukraine right now. I won't name them, but I have a couple friends that are working in Ukraine right now. And the thing about Ukraine is it's become largely a frontline insane front line. Like, I remember when I was covering Iraq, Brett, my friend who was killed, you guys are aware of him. The movie that we made that is an Oscar nominated, it's called Armed Only with a Camera, The Life and Death of Brett Renault. He was my American friend who was killed in Ukraine. It's on HBO Max. But we were together working in Iraq when this drone thing was the first time it ever started happening. These people were using commercial drones by places like DJI drones, and ISIS was taking and putting and arming them and dropping mortars on us and grenades and rockets and all this stuff. They were just picking them up and dropping them right in our position. It was insane, and we thought it was crazy at the time, and it was supremely dangerous. And the way that the Iraqis we were with were trying to countermeasure was they were literally trying to shoot them out of the sky with their AK-47s. And now it's become sophisticated warfare, and the Ukrainian military has taken it to a whole new level of lethality, and and they're doing very well with the drones that they have. They're manufacturing millions of these drones a year, and they're using them to kill Russian soldiers. And the Russian lines are moving somewhere in the neighborhood between 15 and 70 meters in any given day. It's hardly the takeover that they thought they would have when they started this war. 15 to 70 meters a day. This is Seth Jones reporting this for the institute that he works for. And so, you know, journalists now, I know some friends of mine that are going there right now working. I can't tell you where they're going, what they're doing, but I can tell you that they cannot go to the front lines anymore. There's no way to do that safely. And President Zelensky is really not letting people go there. There was a couple good films out about the front lines in the last 2 years done by local journalists who were allowed to go up there and cover it. Man, but they got out by the skin of their teeth. And the drone war has gotten even worse since then. And I just don't believe it's the kind of place, I covered war for 30 years. And I actually don't think right now, this would be the first war that I think I would cover it, but I would cover it from like Kyiv or someplace. If you're within 20 miles of that front line, you are in danger of getting whacked by a drone from a Russian drone. And it's the same with the Russian soldiers over there. They can't come out of their foxholes. And so journalists can't move around and talk to people. They would literally have to get in a foxhole, hopefully safely, by walking 15 kilometers or so through the cold, get in a hole and never come out for like a month. it's, I mean, it's, it doesn't sound like, the romanticism that you hear about in All's Quiet on the Western Front. You know what I mean? It's nuts. It's one thing to be shot at. I can tell you I've been shot at a lot and hear those bullets go whizzing by you, or being in a mortar attack where, things happen for like 15 or 20 minutes and then you're like terrified, shitting your pants. And it's quite another to be tracked by a drone. I remember where we were in Mosul, in West Mosul, we had 2 armored vehicles in our compound, and we were 2.5 kilometers from the ISIS front lines. And we used to go up the front lines every day and go back to this safe house that we had. It was just an abandoned house, no windows, no doors, no heat, no electricity. We'd live out of that. But we had our 2 armored vehicles outside of the compound. And one day, the Americans shot down one of the ISIS drones, and they brought it back, and they took the card out and they started going through the card, and they had pictures of us standing in our compound, and they had pictures of our vehicles that they had shot. They were taking pictures of the place we were. So that's horrifying when you get that picture and somebody goes, you need to be aware of this. Now imagine if they did that all day long, 24 hours a day, and you were a journalist. It's just not it's just, sometimes maybe you think it's worth it. Is the fame and fortune worth it? I don't know. Probably not, because there's a very good chance you're going to get killed. There's a reason 35,000 Russians a month are getting killed. And at 2 months, that's more than were killed in Vietnam in just 2 months. And that's just one side. So you can imagine if you're one journalist going over there and trying to sneak around the battle space, you're going to get killed. It's not like you might get killed. It's you're going to get killed. The longer you stay, you're going to get killed. A day, 2 days, 5 days, a month, you can't move. So I think it's very difficult. And most of the journalists covering it are talking to people as they come out to the safer areas, which might be someplace like Kyiv, where you might just get rocketed, with missiles from, it's different. Missiles suck. It's terrible, but it's not like being followed. There's something strange about being followed and knowing they can follow you and then put a drone in your window and explode it. It's different than a rocket hitting your apartment building that you're in. And I've had both those situations happen. So I think it's very difficult work over there. And, you have to really applaud the Ukrainian journalists who are still over there working. It's fucking vicious. And, I don't know how they do it, frankly. And I did it for 30 years. What else?
What do you think Putin's endgame is in Ukraine?
Putin's endgame. He's lost, I think the number I saw was 17 times more people there than he had in the entire conflict in Afghanistan. Is a crazy number for battlefield casualties, not to the disease part, because they lost a lot to disease. But anyways, the number's huge. And he, I think, feels, isolated. He's now going to be, if he leaves there, he very easily could be charged as a war criminal. He's being charged as a war criminal. All of his resources, financial resources, are going away. He still have a tremendous amount of economic scale, military-wise, that he has to produce every month. He's got less and less competent officers and soldiers fighting for them, less and less discipline, less and less training. It's a very bad position for him to be in. And and now he's trying to get conscripts from other countries to come over and fight for them. So he doesn't have to take the rest of his population and get them all annihilated. But I don't think he cares. I think the people that he's sending to these front lines, a lot of them are criminals. Some of them are coming from the nether regions of Russia where he doesn't give a shit. He's like plucking people out of, I don't want to use a bad state name here as a comparison, but he's taking people from less reputable, less affluent places from Russia and sticking them out there. And I think he's sacrificing a lot of his population for it. But I don't think he feels like he's got an end game now. I think he's just trying to make this last as long as he can, hoping that he can bleed Ukraine to the point of where they run out of people that can fight. But that's hard to do because the Ukrainians are being smart at how they fight now with the drones. They're not sacrificing this, and they've lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 600,000 to somewhere in the neighborhood of, I have the exact numbers here somewhere. I got it. Well, I've got a whole study on this stuff sitting in front of me, but I haven't got it queued up. The Russians have lost far more people to the fight there than the Ukrainians have at this point. Russian forces suffered 1.2 million casualties, killed, wounded, missing, as many as 325,000 killed since 2022.
Did they put women in battle?
Probably not too many of them. They probably put them in support roles. You can use people in support roles like that, but Russian casualties and fatalities, 1.2 million, 35,000 casualties per month, roughly 415,000 Russian casualties in 2025 alone. That's almost 10 times the amount that were lost in the entire conflict in Vietnam in just 1 year. The scale is something we can't imagine, just to give you, just insane. Sorry. When I said, yeah, that's right, I was right. Russian battlefield fatalities in Ukraine are more than 70 times greater than the Soviet fatalities in Afghanistan in the 80s, 11 times greater than during Russia's first and second Chechen wars in the 1990s and 2000s, respectively, and over 5 times greater than all Russian and Soviet wars combined since World War II. I mean, they're dropping like flies over there, And
did they think it was going to be signed off?
Well, I think obviously the Russians thought they were going to just roll right over Ukraine because Ukraine's much smaller population-wise and a smaller country, and they weren't prepared for it. And they had a comedian who became president, right? And you got a guy who used to be one of the top guys of the KGB running the whole thing. I thought he was going to just run over him. And, they ran into some shitty weather and a lot of rain. And, the one thing I noticed when I was covering the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, we did a big push from Kuwait all the way into Baghdad. And we got stuck because the supply chain, we had one main highway basically going into Baghdad over, a couple hundred miles. And the supply chain was at a dead stop on paved highways for days, couldn't move an inch. Traffic jam going one direction. And I don't think people understand when you're trying to move that much equipment, what it means. It's, you've got tens of thousands of vehicles when you've got 500,000 people doing a war, like in, say, Iraq. You have to move, tanks, for instance, don't move on miles per gallon. They work on gallons per mile. So when a tank goes 200 miles, they need to refuel these things frequently, and you need to be able to get those vehicles up there and refuel them. And guys need water when it's 120 degrees out. They need food, and man, it's not like the Civil War when they're standing across the field from each other and they always run across and slaughter each other. It doesn't work like that. It's really slow and grinding. And I think the Russians didn't anticipate that. They hadn't done that since Afghanistan, and they did it on a much smaller scale. Um, and I don't think they anticipated that it would take this long. They thought it was, I'll make an admission. I thought the whole thing would be over in 4 days. I did. I thought it'd be over in 4 days. I thought the Russians were going to crush them in 4 days. And then when 4 days turned to 4 months, then I thought, well, they're going to bleed them dry. They're just going to throw people at it. And then I'll tell you what, man, these Ukrainian troops, they figured out the drone story, and they've changed the nature of warfare forever. And bless them, they're still taking a lot of casualties too, and their people are suffering. So, yeah. What else?
Oh, back to Epstein.
What'd you do about maybe 10 more questions?
Someone made an observation. Don't you think it's strange that Trump didn't destroy or hide the Epstein files at Mar-a-Lago during his first term?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I need to think about that one. I don't know. I mean, what's to say that wasn't part of what he had? We knew he had a lot of files. We knew he had a lot of classified files. We knew he had a lot, but maybe he just thought that story was over. He spent 4 years in administration, never came up, and he probably didn't think it was going to be a big deal. And then when they asked him about it, you going to release Epstein file? He's like, yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, you didn't think it was going to be this. You never think something like this is going to be this big, because he'd gotten away with everything. Remember, this is the guy who said, I could shoot somebody on Broadway and still be reelected. So that's how he thinks about himself and about everything else. And he doesn't care. You think about Watergate, the president was about to be impeached and he resigned. This guy's not going to resign. But, and he walked away and didn't get charged with anything. But his attorney general went to jail. Can't forget that history.
The court said he didn't have a fully complicit DOJ first time around either.
Yeah, that's right. That's very true. Bill Barr. I don't like Bill Barr. He's an asshole and he's a liar. But he, I think he understood his place in history if he went too far. So there's certain lines he wouldn't cross. And Trump learned from that, by the way. Trump learned that he needed nothing but loyalists following him into every cabinet position. He had a lot of turnover in that first administration because he ran into principled people who, although they would disagree with, say, maybe you're in my politics, they had certain principles. John Kelly, certain principles, those kind of people, they didn't want to break the law and they didn't want to be caught later for breaking the law. And some of them principally didn't want to, do what they thought was wrong. And so he learned from that. And he said, well, now I'm going to bring everybody with me. I don't give a shit whether they're smart or not. I just want them to be loyal. And if they're loyal, I'll just promise them pardons. They do whatever I ask. And then in the end, I'll just pardon them. That's what I'll tell them. And that's probably what he's going to do. And that's why we need to have stronger state prosecution for some of the things you're seeing, because you can't pardon state prosecutions. You can only pardon federal crimes. So what else?
Any word on Assad? Is he just hiding in Russia?
I don't know. I think pretty much, who knows? He probably is. I mean, I think in the end, didn't they find, who was it? Did they find Idi Amin in Iraq? Was it Idi Amin they found in Iraq later? Who was it? Some one of those despots, found their way into Iraq, and when, we found out they were there later. I mean, I think Assad it's not like he's ever coming back, so people have forgotten about him. They don't care. Even if they could bring him up on war crimes, they're not going to go fetch him where he's at. I just don't think he's viable story anymore. So they kind of forgot about him.
Do you think this siege on democracy will die with Trump, or will there be people to carry on his vision?
Which democracy?
Or the siege on democracy?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think that what we're seeing right now is these Republican leaders like Mike Johnson trying to gain more power. And you can see how quickly somebody will. I think it's really important to remember that people like Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance hated Donald Trump until he offered them power. Okay? I mean, they were shitbagging him till hell freezes over. And now they're vice president of the United States and secretary of state, and they have nothing but love for him. And they know he's reprehensible. Power, power does that to people. And I think Mike Johnson's one of those people. I think Mike Johnson, the good Christian that he is more than willing to sell his soul for power. And I think you'll see people like that rise up, and they'll start saying the things in a personable sort of way that makes those MAGA people want to follow them when Trump's not around. But I wouldn't rule Trump as, don't think for a second that if he wins the House and the Senate, he won't try to hold on to this government in 4 years, regardless of what the law says and what the Constitution says. I think that's the first obstacle. The second is to identify those people who are dangerous to our democracy on the Republican side and shedding light on them as much as we possibly can, and hoping that even if the MAGA people are still trying to hold on to power through those people, that we've convinced enough people that we don't want to do this shit again. We don't want somebody like Donald Trump coming and being replaced by somebody just like him and throwing the laws of this land out the door and the Constitution out the door. When you're prosecuting a United States senator for telling people don't disobey the law, that's not America, not at all. And America is built on free speech. It's one of the most important tenets of our free speech, free religious, freedom to assemble, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't give a shit. The only thing they care about is their guns, and they care about freedom to assemble when it's them. And they like to apply the law unevenly. So I don't know the answer to that. And I always think people, when they cover politics, they should be really careful about making big predictions like that. Because you just never know which way it's going to go. Democracy's messy. So.
Okay. And we need to either have me speaking up on the questions or repeating them.
Okay.
Why don't the Clintons just tell their side of the story publicly?
I think the Clintons don't really want to go delving into all the deepness of the relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. They obviously were chummy with him. I think Clinton probably knows he didn't do anything improper or illegal for once in his life. For all of his philandering and having sex with 23-year-old interns and all that kind of stuff, there's no indication at this point that in the course of his philandering life, he ever messed around with children. And I think he knows that. And I think he's going to go up there probably and say, listen, I've made mistakes in my life. Of course I have. My wife's up here to support that. But I never messed around with little children. I didn't. That's why I came, because I knew I could speak freely about this. And if you have evidence to the contrary, put it on the table. Now, whether he's going to come out and do that publicly, I don't think he really wants to go down that road. He's got the Clinton Foundation that they run. They try to raise money. He doesn't want to be wrapped up in that stuff. He doesn't have to. But he also wants to force their hand. So he will testify. And I think that somebody put on my page the other day that he would testify behind closed doors, but it would be taped and released. I knew just prior to that, his insistence was that it'd be an open testimony. Now, you guys can look it up on Google. It's coming up probably in the next little while. But I think that coming out, you might open yourself up to stuff that you don't want to open up yourself to unless you're forced to. And they have enough respect for the law to show up for a congressional subpoena, because you can be charged with a crime for violating a congressional subpoena. Jim Jordan should have been charged with a crime for violating a congressional subpoena on the January 6th hearings, but he wasn't. But he should be. And there were others who were. And so he realizes that. They're both smart people. He was a Rhodes Scholar. She's a gifted lawyer in her own right. They're not going to mess around with the law. They'll show up and they'll say what they have to. But I think that these folks they're going up against aren't as smart as them. And they're really opening themselves up to a lot of ridicule, because the Clintons probably know a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and who he was hanging out with. And they could just as easily name all those names, because they'd be bound to, because they're bound to answer questions in court unless they plead the fifth. And you don't want to plead the fifth. It makes you look guilty. So go ahead and answer them. Did you know of it? Did you ever witness any crime? Blah, blah, blah. And start naming all these people. They're going to get what they ask for. Be careful what you ask for, Republican Congress. They're smarter than that. So what else?
Do you think a true participatory democracy is possible?
I don't know. That's beyond me. I mean, do I think a participatory democracy is really possible? You always hear people say democracy is messy, but it's still the best system of government we have. The question now is it really? Is it really? Because we've seen what happens when one person goes rogue and it screws up the whole bushel of apples. And so we have to have better protections for this Constitution. And we can't be. I think we need to solve the gerrymandering problem. As much as I laugh and go, ha ha, Texas, take that. California's going to stick it up your ass. I still don't think gerrymandering is a good thing, because we could gerrymander each other into nobody having a say in government. My neighbor is a really nice guy. He's a Republican. He's the sweetest guy in the world. And he's furious over this because Abigail Spanberger's going to push through this thing where they gerrymander the state, and this largely Republican county I live in could end up being blue because of gerrymandering. I don't think that's right. I think that, the states need to be separated properly, and we should be able to have some bipartisan boards that figure out how that's going to be split instead of just the winners get to draw their own maps each couple of years. That's stupid. And, those are the kinds of things that threaten, participatory democracies. And, I don't know if it's going to make it. I used to tell people, I covered war for 30 years, and people used to joke around about civil war in the United States and all stuff. And I used to say, well, it's actually good for me because I won't need a translator. Okay. And, and I don't have to leave home for long because it's all happened in my backyard. It'd be great. It'd be amazing to cover civil war in the United States. It was a joke. And now look where we're at. We're at a point where, it's really getting scary, where people are like, Jeff, you should be really careful what you say. ICE might come to your door. They might, you're right. They might come to my door. Who cares? It's like the way it is. But the fact is that we're actually talking about this stuff now as if it might actually happen. And that's terrifying. And then I always used to make the joke. The bad side of it is that I wouldn't get the air miles. Right? I used to get a lot of air miles when I'd fly to Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Libya. No more air miles. So that's that war zone journalism or humor that I used to tell everybody about that nobody probably thinks is funny, but I think it's hilarious. A couple more questions, so we're going to wrap for the night.
Okay, that was no. What do you think about the potential for constitutional amendments to ensure this shit show doesn't happen again?
I think constitutional amendments are so hard to get pushed through, especially in the climate we're in now. I wouldn't count on anything. I wouldn't count on there's no push for any right now. And, it's such a difficult lift. I wouldn't put any hope in that at all.
Do you believe we're going to have midterm elections? Someone's curious about your thoughts on
I don't know. I don't know. I think if Trump thinks he can win, he'll have, because he's got a backup plan. First, it was gerrymandering. That didn't work. Now it's going to be the SAVE Act. If that works, maybe he thinks he can have fair elections that are favorable to him. He might have them. But if he loses all this stuff, I think he'll manufacture something like a Minnesota and then say the country's coming off its rails and we need martial law. And, if Zelensky doesn't have to have elections while he's being invaded by Russia, why should I have to have them? I think that's a real possibility. I hope it's not true, but I think it's a real possibility. I think if he does that, he'll have to lock down everybody because I think there'll be Republicans at that point that will impeach him. But that doesn't mean that he'll leave the office voluntarily. He might say that's why he wants people who won't disobey unlawful orders, or who will disobey unlawful orders, because he wants to be able to call the military on a moment's notice to say, I'm your man. Forget about this piece of paper. You're following my orders. And I think that's probably why he's trying to prosecute Kelly. He wants a military that will listen only to him in case shit goes really, really bad. Because he knows in the end, there's a very good chance he'll go to jail. The Supreme Court gave him cover by saying, he can't be prosecuted like a normal person unless it's, especially if it's in the act of official duty. But he's done a lot of stuff that is not in the act of official business of the presidency. A lot of it's very personal. The crypto stuff, all that stuff is personal. His family business that he's, banked the U.S. government off of. Just 100 different things that you can think of that were not personal in nature that I think will come back if he's still alive, that he can be prosecuted for, and rightfully so. And I think he knows that, and I think that's why he wants the military, under his skin, under his thumb. One more.
All right. Well, we'll end with, what do we as normal people do to stop these nuts?
I think I come back to this a lot. What do we do as normal people to stop these nuts? I think, you have to bank on our best opportunity for success, which is you need to be a participatory person in your own democracy. Help yourself locally. It's great to have protests and all that stuff, but the biggest thing you could do is, let's say the SAVE Act passes. Well, get somebody in your community to put together a group of people that go around and register people who can't do it themselves, who don't have the proper documents. Help them find it. Set up clinics to do that stuff, so we get those people registered again. Get voter registration drives going in your community. Um, you know, uh, seek out candidates who you think could run for public office who have the toughness to fight these people, right? Because that's what the Republicans do. They're ruthless. Look at Gavin Newsom. That guy, for whatever you think of Gavin Newsom, I don't care what you think of him, but he doesn't take shit from anybody, and he fights back. And he's getting under Trump's skin like nobody else, and he hasn't even announced he's running for president. So you need candidates who can fight back. The Chuck Schumers of the world, I'm sorry, I'm sure he's a great guy, but when something bad happens, he sends a letter to somebody. We're past the letter stage, man. Democracy's on its in this country, it's in peril. You can't be sending letters anymore. It doesn't matter. You need to be really, really finding solutions to problems by, arguing in real way in front of people who matter. And you need to be suing people over things that are illegal, not just saying that's not right. We're going to really fight hard for it. You got to file lawsuits. You got to find groups that you get to file lawsuits on your behalf, people that have standing in the courts. These things, there's a reason all these things are going through the courts right now in the election stuff, because these are the battlegrounds right now. Give money to organizations that, like the ACLU, are fighting these court battles. They're fighting a U.S. government that has unlimited funds. They have taxpayer funds. They have your funds. So give your money to organizations that can fight for these judicial rulings. So I think just participating in a strong way is the best thing you can do. And anybody can do that kind of stuff. You can get on phone banks if you're 75 years old and call and say, hey, are you registered? If you're not, can we send somebody out to your house to help you find your passport or update your passport or help you figure out through vital statistics what your birth certificate is? I mean, these are things that are going to need to happen. Democrats should be talking about it already. It's already February. I mean, the primaries are in May, right? Am I right about that? In May? Then you have an election, general election in November. So this shit needs to happen now, because this SAVE Act, if it passes, is going to be horrendous for 21 million Americans, roughly, who are going to get kicked off rolls. And these guys are going to try to kick off people off rolls just because their last name is Rodriguez or Gomez. And it's going to say D when they get their hands on their voter registration information. D means Democrat. Gomez means brown skin. Boom, he's gone. Make him apply again and prove that he's actually needs to be on. They're not going to ask questions. They're going to purge. So you got to fight against that stuff, and you got to be a part of a community that can help fight against that stuff. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can pick up a phone. You can go door to door and knock with people, help them fill out forms. You can go have people, put posters in people's front yards during election months. That stuff matters. It really does. So I think that's it for the night. Substack, paid subscribers. You're not moving fast enough. My dog is really hungry for kibbles. We're thinking about canned food as well, but we're not there yet. Throwing a piece of chicken every now and then. Substack is at From the Writer's Cabin. And we're on Facebook. And a lot of people ask me, like, you put stuff on Facebook, you also put them in Substack. It's because I'm trying to convert people over. And at a certain point, I'm just going to have to go, I can't put any of this stuff on Facebook anymore. And hopefully nobody's going to be mad at me, but I'm doing a lot. I spent all day on this stuff. Like, this stuff doesn't happen all day long by itself. And you know what I mean? It's work, even though I'm not doing original reporting on it. So I'm at 12 to 16 hours a day doing this while simultaneously trying to run the cabin business with my wife. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week. And we'll have some guests lined up. I'm already talking to some people from various walks of life that I hope you guys will be interested in. I hope if you have any feedback, send me a message. I read as many as I possibly can, most of them. Yeah, we appreciate that. I'm trying to slurp less, trying to not use many bad words. Maybe not. Anyways, have a good night, everybody. Take care. Upper left.
There you go.